All right, so in this explainer, we're going to tackle something pretty wild. We're dissecting this incredibly complex philosophical argument, and our guide? Well, it's this obscure, unpublished story from the 18th century. And the claim is it holds a secret key to understanding our entire modern world.
And it all kicks off with this really provocative question, right? Is the way we think today, is it actually a tool for freedom, or is it something else entirely, a sophisticated trap designed to control us? The source material we're digging into today argues, yeah, it's a trap, a meticulously designed one.
So our guide for this whole journey is what's basically a secret map. It's an unpublished allegory from 1767 by a Scottish philosopher, James Beattie, called The Castle of Skepticism. Now, according to the analysis we're looking at, this isn't just some old story. Nope, it's described as a forensic blueprint, a way to understand the intellectual landscape we're all living in right now.
And that's because the core argument here is that this castle isn't just a metaphor for a way of thinking. It's a detailed diagram of how knowledge itself has been systematically, intentionally subverted over centuries. I mean, listen to how the source puts it, directly. The castle was not written to entertain, it is a structured forensic exhibit. Wow. So that really sets the stage, doesn't it? We're not just reading a quaint story. We're supposedly being handed a strategic map of intellectual warfare.
Okay, so let's dive right in. We're going to take a tour of this castle. And you've got to understand, each room, every hallway we're about to visit, it represents a specific tactic, a piece of this, well, this architecture of deceit. Our tour is going to take us through 6 key spots inside the castle. First, the gate of entrance. Then we'll move to the Hall of Echoes, the Chamber of Mirrors, the Hall of Statues, the Balcony of Infinite Vistas, and finally, we're heading to the throne room itself. So we start right at the gate. And here's the clever part. The castle doesn't try to scare you away. It actually lures you in with what sounds like humility, right? You hear phrases like, oh, we can't really know for sure, or let's just remain open-minded. And look, that sounds perfectly reasonable, but the argument here is that this is a strategic move. It's like a gateway drug to get you to suspend your own rational judgment, to disable your confidence that truth can even be found.
Okay, once you're inside, you find yourself in the Hall of Echoes. This is where language itself is turned into a weapon. Words get completely disconnected from the things they're supposed to represent. Think about big words like truth or justice. Suddenly they become slippery. Their meanings can be twisted or even inverted. The source calls this an ontological assault, which is a fancy way of saying it's a controlled demolition of meaning itself. The whole point is to disorient you.
From there, we hit the Chamber of Mirrors. Now, this room represents these big systems of thought that only refer to themselves. They completely reject any appeal to an outside, objective reality. The system's own logic becomes the only truth. It's the perfect intellectual echo chamber, right? Where reason just turns inward and starts, well, consuming itself.
And the consequences of getting trapped in a room like that, they're profound. As the commentary on this puts it, it is not thought which governs him, but the system that replaced his conscience. Think about that. Your own individual conscience gets swapped out for the cold, unthinking logic of the system.
So a fortress like this, it doesn't just spring up out of nowhere, right? Who built it? The source actually identifies specific architects and traces the construction back for centuries. Let's dig into who exactly is behind this castle of skepticism.
So according to this analysis, the foundations were laid way back, over centuries. It supposedly starts in the 15th century with something called the Hermetic Revival, which rebranded some old esoteric traditions. Fast forward to the 1600s, and you get Francis Bacon. His Great Renewal is pinpointed as the moment knowledge starts getting severed from reality, focusing more on just instrumental control. And then his protege, Thomas Hobbes, comes along and builds the walls by throwing out the old idea of natural law and replacing it with the raw will of a sovereign ruler.
And this slide, this really shows you the fundamental shift that happened. The old foundation, natural law, saw humans as rational and social. Law was something you discovered in a real moral order. But in this new fortress that Hobbes built, man is seen as just isolated, fearful matter in motion, and law isn't discovered, it's created by whoever has power. Suddenly, consent isn't about participating in truth anymore, it's just a ritual of surrendering to that power.
Okay, so Bacon and Hobbes built the walls. That's a huge part of the structure. But the source we're looking at argues that another figure came along and locked the inner gates, the gates of the mind itself, making it incredibly difficult to escape.
And that figure was a 19th century Scottish philosopher named James Ferrier. The claim is that Ferrier took what was left of common sense realism, the simple idea that our minds can know reality directly, and just refined it out of existence. He apparently eliminated it like so much dross, leaving behind only an unalloyed idealism. Basically, a system where our thoughts have zero connection to the world outside our heads.
And Ferrier's key weapon, according to this analysis, was the invention of the very field we now call epistemology, the study of knowledge. But here's the twist. It's argued that this wasn't created as a tool for clarity. It was designed as a system of containment, a cage to trap all inquiry inside the mind and completely sever the connection between knowing and being.
So this metaphysical sabotage supposedly accomplished three key things for the castle's architects. First, it just destroyed the basic idea that knowledge should correspond to reality. Second, it undermined the moral authority of plain old common sense. And third, it created this closed system where truth became something only initiated elites could access, people who understood the complicated new rules of the game.
And this brings us to the ultimate consequence of being trapped inside this intellectual fortress. This is where we see what happens when reason is completely cut off from reality. It starts to turn on itself.
The classical tradition was actually pretty simple. The whole point of reason was to conform your mind to reality, to figure out what is. But the castle's architects, the argument goes, flip that completely upside down. Reason's new job was to create its own self-contained world, totally independent of anything real.
And this path to self-destruction happened in a few key stages, according to the source. First, you have Descartes divorcing thought from the world. Then Kant comes along and takes it a step further, declaring that ultimate reality is fundamentally unknowable to us anyway. And finally, Ferrier swoops in to institutionalize this whole way of thinking, basically mocking the idea of realism as some kind of quaint, exotic relic.
And the result is perfectly captured by this symbol, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. It represents a system of reason that has become totally self-destructive. It's no longer a tool for finding truth or defending liberty. Instead, it's become the very logic used to abolish them.
And this brings us to the source's final diagnosis, which lays out a really stark choice. When reason is severed from being, it becomes a system of control. When it returns to being, it becomes the foundation of freedom.
So we're going to end not with a neat summary, but with the really urgent question this whole analysis leaves us with. If this interpretation is right, if our modern way of knowing has been captured inside this intellectual castle, then the real question is, what's the key to escape?